guys, it's Miss Lambert, and today we are going to do chapters 4 and 5 of Hidden Figures. This is the Young Readers edition written by Margaret Lee Shetterly. So let's get into it. Chapter 4, A New Beginning. In the fall of 1943, Dorothy Vaughan started the school year teaching math at R.R. Moten, a black high school in Farmville, Virginia, just as she had for the past 12 years. She loved being a teacher, and she dedicated herself to helping her students as much as she could while waiting for a response to the job applications she had submitted a few months earlier. Dorothy had plenty to keep her busy. The high school had been built for 180 students, but more than 300 now squeezed into the classrooms. She taught algebra in the school's overcrowded auditorium with 2 other classes taking place in the same space. After school, she tutored students who needed more help and spent time working with the school's parent-teacher association. Outside of school, Dorothy was a founding board member of the Farmville chapter of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a civil rights group. What can we do to win the war? World War II was never far from anyone's minds. That fall, the high school's 4-H club made care packages for departing servicemen and hosted a community discussion titled, What Can We Do to Win the War? The school sold war stamps to raise money for the military. The community held going-away parties and feasts for the young men heading off to the front lines of combat. Dorothy updated her classes and added a unit called Wartime Mathematics, where she taught students how to use math to follow a household budget and manage wartime ration books, coupon books that allowed each family only a limited amount of various supplies such as flour and sugar. Then, in November, a letter from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics finally arrived. You are hereby appointed mathematician, grade P1, with pay at a rate of $2,000 per annum, the letter said. That was more than twice the $850 annual salary she earned as a teacher. When Dorothy thought about the civil service jobs she had applied for, she had mixed feelings. She was a wife and a mother of 4 children. The job at the Langley Laboratory was a full-time position 6 days a week. If she accepted the job, she would have to move 4 hours away from her children, and she'd only be able to come back home to see them on holidays. But Dorothy knew this was a very good job, one that would allow her to help her family, so she accepted. She shared the news with her family and friends. Her students were sad to see their teacher, Miss Vaughan, leave the school. The townspeople found out about Dorothy's decision when they read a notice in the Farmville section of the Norfolk Journal and Guide. It read, Miss D.J. Vaughan, instructor in mathematics at the high school for several years, has accepted a position at Langley Field, Virginia. Dorothy didn't like long goodbyes. I'll be back for Christmas, she told her 4 young children. She was sad to leave them, but she knew that her children would be well cared for at home in Farmville. They lived in a rambling Victorian house with their grandparents, and they were surrounded by dozens of aunts and uncles and cousins. Dorothy's children would miss their mother, but their daily schedules wouldn't change much. For 12 years, Dorothy had walked out of her front door and turned left to walk to the school where she worked. But on the morning she left for her new job at the Langley Memorial Aeronautic Laboratory, she turned in the opposite direction, and she didn't look back. Leaving home, Dorothy Vaughan rode a Greyhound bus 137 miles from Farmville to Newport News, Virginia. While on the bus, she had plenty of time to think. What would it be like to work with white people? Would she sit side by side with young women like the ones at the State Teachers College? How would she endure the time from her children and family? Mile after mile, Dorothy watched the gentle hills rising and falling outside her window. She refused to feel any self-doubt. Her country needed her, and she was ready and eager to do her part to support the war effort and her family. Chapter 5, The Double V. In the early 1940s, the Hampton Roads area was bustling with newcomers. The cities around the harbor, Newport News and Hampton to the north, and Portsmouth, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach to the south, had welcomed hundreds of thousands of new residents since the start of World War II. Between 1940 and 1942, the region's population had increased by more than 50%. The area had emerged as a powerful military capital, and most of the jobs there were now related to the war. Much of the work belonged to women. The sight of women wearing coveralls and working at filling stations, a job that used to be just for men, no longer turned heads. Women now did all kinds of jobs: shined shoes, worked in the shipyard, and staffed offices. With men off to fight on the front lines, women power picked up the slack. The war operated around the clock, 3 8-hour shifts, and many businesses tried to keep pace. Some stores stayed open long hours. The movie theater showed movies from 11 a.m. to midnight, often featuring films with a strong dose of patriotism. Banks stayed open late to cash checks for workers. All of the new residents needed places to live. Landlords doubled their rents and still had long waiting lists. Water systems, electrical plants, schools, and hospitals struggled to keep up with the growing population. The government addressed the shortage by building 5,200 new houses in the east end of Newport News. Of those, 1,200 homes were built for African Americans in a separate subdivision known as Newsom Park. Welcome. Dorothy Vaughan arrived in Newport News on a Thursday and started work at Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory the following Monday. The personnel department kept a file of available houses for new employees, divided by race to comply with the custom of segregation. $5 a week gave Dorothy a room of her own and 2 meals a day in the home of a black couple in their 60s who were willing to take in a boarder. The house was located in the East End, not far from the newly built housing developed Newsom Park. The houses in the city's East End neighborhood were well maintained, surrounded by thriving local businesses, and occupied by members of a growing middle class. City buses and trolleys circulated through the neighborhood from the morning until night as employees punched out from one shift and met workers coming in for the next shift. The buses always seemed crowded, and the race-specific laws made commuting more difficult. Whites had to enter and exit from the front of the bus, while blacks had to go in and out of the back, behind what was known as the colored line. Those in the back of the bus had to stand if the white section was full. When the buses were short on conductors, blacks had to enter at the front and push their way to the back section, then do the same in reverse to get off the bus. Blacks caught in the white section were fined or arrested. Even whites complained about the jostling and scrambling caused by the rules. Virginia state law requires all colored passengers to ride in the rear of the bus. Citizens Rapid Transit Company. And this is a sign from the Newport News, Virginia bus station in 1954. Race and patriotism. In Hampton Roads and across the country, relationships between blacks and whites became strained. Overcrowded buses, 6-day work weeks, constant noise and construction, shortages of sugar, coffee, butter, and meat. All of these factors came together to create tension. This was not a new problem. 2 years earlier, in his 1941 State of the Union address, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had promised that men of every creed and every race, wherever they lived in the world, were entitled to 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He pledged that the United States would help to overcome dictators in other countries who would deny other people their freedoms. African Americans were sympathetic to the needs of oppressed people around the world. They shared in the horror when they learned about the acts of the Germans against their Jewish citizens, limiting the jobs they could have, imprisoning them, denying them citizenship, treating them with violence, segregating them into ghettos, working them to death in slave camps, and having them killed. How could black Americans learn about the way the Jews were treated without comparing some of these experiences to some of their own struggles against slavery, unfair treatment, and violence at home? For generations, African Americans have been promised an end to discrimination. But instead of greater freedom, the period between World War I and World War II 1918 to 1941 saw segregation harden and become the law of the land. As America made the decision to join the fighting in World War II, African Americans pressured the government to open the war jobs to their community. Leaders like A. Philip Randolph, who had helped make the Fair Employment Practices laws a reality, asked the country to show its patriotism by treating all of its citizens fairly. Black newspapers spoke out on the issue. Help us to get some of the blessings of democracy here at home first before you jump on the free other people bandwagon and tell us to go forth and die in a foreign land, said P.B. Young, the owner of the Norfolk Journal and Guide, in a 1942 editorial. Should African Americans fight for freedom overseas when they did not experience it themselves at home? James Thompson, a 26-year-old cafeteria worker, made his case in a letter to the Pittsburgh Courier. Being an American of dark complexion, these questions flash through my mind. Is the kind of America I know worth defending? Will colored Americans suffer still the indignities that have been heaped upon them in the past? These and other questions need answering. I want to know, and I believe every colored American who is thinking wants to know. What are we fighting for? This was the question asked by many African Americans in private and in public. African Americans were loyal to their country. They had a deep and abiding belief in the possibility of democracy. When Pearl Harbor was attacked and the United States joined the fighting in World War II, the African American community closed ranks as they had done in previous times of war. They geared up to fight for their country's future and for their own. For this divide between feeling black and feeling American came the idea of the double victory. James Thompson expressed the idea in his letter to the Pittsburgh Courier. Let colored Americans adopt the double V for double victory. The first V for victory over our enemies from without. The second V for victory over our enemies within. For surely those who perpetrate these ugly prejudices here are seeking to destroy our democratic form of government just as surely as the Axis forces. Dorothy Vaughan understood the importance of the double V, victory in the war and victory in the civil rights struggle at home. By accepting her post as a mathematician, she believed she was working toward both goals. On December 1st, 1943, the leaders of the United States, Great Britain, and Russia concluded a conference during which they planned a summer invasion of France. It was an invasion that would become a turning point in the war and that eventually became known as D-Day. On the same day, Dorothy Vaughan stepped behind the colored line on the bus and headed to her first day of work at the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory. All right, and tomorrow we will do Chapter 6.